All right. Well, it is a Monday, and I am delighted to be joined a little early. Well, early for me, but unfortunately, very, very late for my guest Soumik, who is muted, and I'm unable to. There we go. Now we get it all worked out. Thank you, by the way, for hanging out with me here this late. I know it's late on Monday for you. Thank you for that. So, good evening, I can officially say to you. Good morning for me. So, hi, Soumik. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good actually. And oh, I'm completely used to this, so do not worry about it. It's completely fine by me.
Yeah, we were talking about this in the pre-show, just the joy of time zones and trying to make things work across time zones. And I spent a lot of my career working in a company where we had a pretty big office in the East Coast, and how I mentioned to you that our East Coast folks were pretty much convinced that Eastern was the only time zone, and there were no
Hmm.
other time zones. And it's even worse trying to juggle things across our time zones. I think you're what do we figure out? Are you plus 12 and a half, plus 11 and a half for me? Something like
Uh,
that. I can't remember.
think so. I think it's 7. I'm horrible with this. I'm so sorry.
I
I
don't
think
know.
it's
I
around
don't know.
11
I,
to
I
12
can't I
hours.
can't do math at this hour in
Yeah,
the morning. I make my computer
it's
do
just
math. Well, good evening. I'm delighted you could hang out
good
with
morning to
me.
you.
So why don't we start with where I typically always start with is your origin story. How did you get into this crazy world about software? And tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll dive off from there.
Right. Sure. So I'm Soumik, and I know where exactly to start. So to give some context, I as of now, I mainly work with the Carvel team, and I've been doing that for around a year. And I was a student before that. But to sort of, if I think about when exactly I was first interested into software, I would say it goes back all the way to fourth grade or fifth grade actually. So we had this weird class. It's something called Logo. I don't
Oh yeah,
remember what it's actually used for, but there's
sure.
this tiny triangle called the turtle, and you can like make it walk around using by writing some lines, and it just sort of paints something for you, and like that was pretty fun. And I don't know, I guess I sort of developed an inclination towards it then. And
Sure.
while I was in college, I actually sort of freelanced all over the place. Like I used to design every now and then, and I did a few portfolio websites and such. So yeah, I just really got the knack of it. So that's that's how I would say. Yeah.
Sure. Was there anything that particularly kind of drew you into, I always say that I get to play with computers. That's what I do for a living. Is there anything that kind of drew you into that space? Anything that you thought like, oh yeah, this is what, fires me up, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say it's just the joy of making things work. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all actually. You just put things together and it just works at the end of the day. So yeah,
Yep.
it's definitely that for me.
Well, it's a much more creative process than I think we give it credit. I've said this before. It's not like writing poetry. It's not like writing a song or anything like that. But it is still a creative thing, and there's a lot of interesting aspects of that I think drawn more than just sort of that technical background, and that's part of what I love about it is that tinkering, problem solving, hey, let's try this. Ooh, how does this work? Ooh, hey, look, I got that to work. And then just kind of building from there. But
Yeah.
so what are you working on now? I know we've been chatting a little bit about this.
Mhm.
I Tell me more about Carvel. How did you get involved with that?
Right.
What's the what is Carvel? Why should I use Carvel? How is Carvel interesting to me as a developer?
Mhm. So, so Carvel is like a set of tools. So that's how Carvel started off. So, the folks who initially made Carvel, they were trying to build like a set of tools that they can use with each other and with other tools to manage their resources on Kubernetes effectively, right? And after that, so let's say, so what's really unique about Carvel is it's not just one large thing. It's like a set of 6 or 7 tools which do one thing really well, and they are composable with each other. They're composable with other tools, and you can really go pretty creative with what you do with the tools. So now let's say I'm using a set of tools to deploy my resources on Kubernetes, right? So maybe I'm building some images, then I'm doing some templating with my YAML config, and then I'm deploying them using a tool. So this like it's a sort of workflow which we say like it's you fetch something from somewhere, you template it somehow, and then you deploy it on Kubernetes, right? And so pretty recently, I won't be able to say accurately when, but so what folks realized that there's like a good opportunity to do this declaratively, like have a resource. We call it an app CR, where you say that, hey, if I want to do this particular thing on my cluster, what I do is I fetch from this place, I put in these values into it so that it like templates in whatever I want, and then I deploy it using this particular tool. So the tools, yeah, I would love to get into tools, but I guess we can do it eventually. And what and next step was, so now that you have let's say maybe you commit this app CR manifest, which is declarative to Git, right? And your cluster knows cluster just yeah your cluster just picks up your resources config from Git and it puts it onto the cluster. It's templated, and it also goes a step further and ensures that that state is maintained on the cluster. Like if let's say some user makes some changes to some of the resources that were deployed declaratively, it will ensure that that exact state is persisted on the cluster.
Nice.
And yeah, the next step is, so now you have everything, let's say, done in like a very GitOpsy manner, right? And now you want to distribute this, right? You want to maybe have other folks use what you've built. And so that's where versioning comes in. And so the packaging layer is simply a means of adding versions to these workflows. So like one version of the workflow is it like yeah. So like how it changes over time is it's like app CRs with versions assigned to them, and the users can pick which version of the workflow they want to use. So yeah, so that's how like Carvel sort of that's how Carvel sort of, those are the gears and cogs. Yeah.
Sure. Well, we got C Sharp Fritz says good morning. Good morning, C Sharp Fritz. Glad to have you here. Looks like you brought some friends from the Visual Studio Stream team. That is outstanding. We appreciate that. Thank you very much. So this to me is one of those fascinating aspects of software that over my career we keep kind of shifting things left, so to speak, and we're taking a lot of these things that were more of someone else's role and kind of pushing it closer to development. And I always kind of joke that our solution as developers to every problem is to make it look more like software development. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's just the way we see the world. Is that part of what we're trying to do here? Is just kind of keep moving things left, getting it
Right.
more in control of developers, making it easier for developers to make these changes? You know, what do you see driving these kinds of things?
So along with that, of course, I think a major factor is also that computers make less mistakes than us. So
Yes, they do.
right. So it's just much safer if, let's say, you have everything that decides what's happening on your cluster, let's say in a Git repo.
Right.
So yeah, and that's something Carvel really, really focuses on. Like you can configure all of the individual tools, everything that's happening on your cluster, purely by using YAML and having it like put somewhere where it can be easily grabbed from, right? So yeah, I think that's definitely that's definitely what Carvel Carvel benefits from folks who do not want to deploy the resources themselves all the time. Like
Right.
once they have decided what they want to do, I just put it in somewhere, and now I know that that is the state on the cluster. Right? I know that it doesn't diverge from it.
Right. Well, you make a very good point, which is we human beings are not repeatable. And that is fine for your hobby. That is fine for sports. That's fine for your morning coffee. That's not so great when it comes to things we do need to be repeatable and reliable, like, our infrastructure. We'd sure like that to be the same every time. It's
Right.
When I think back to the way we have done things in this industry, it's kind of shocking it ever really worked. When you think about how many moving parts, how many variables we've had, and it seems like anything we can do to streamline that, to take work and toil away from us, is a good thing. Let the computers do what the computers are good at, and let it be that repeatable, reliable thing, instead of hoping that human beings are going to do the same thing every single time. I remember we had like a backup server room in the basement of one of our buildings. And every time I would walk by this door, there was this big sign on it that said, any work that takes place in here must have a signed work order or something like that, right? I mean, it's as if the work order is what makes sure you always do the right thing. And I thought to myself, well, what's guaranteeing that the human being who's coming in here to do the work is doing it correctly and doing what they're supposed to be doing? I mean, I could have a sheet of paper that says anything. It doesn't mean I'm going to follow it. So I'm in favor of anything we can do to make this stuff more reliable and repeatable.
Yeah. And I think so these concepts, like as you mentioned, reliability, reproducibility, they're actually sort of a common theme across our tools. So for example, the tool that's used to deploy resources, it's called CAP. And the idea behind CAP is that you have multiple resources, they have dependencies on each other. You just have a bunch of files. So CAP takes care of things like deploying one resource after the other, or let's say deploying or like restarting a deployment if you update a config map that's being consumed by it. And yeah, it's basically you just do it once. You use some annotations to tell CAP that, hey, this is how I want this to work out. And what's interesting is when CAP deploys onto a cluster, right? So I'm guessing, I haven't used a lot of it, but I'm guessing a lot of folks who work with Kubernetes at some point use Terraform.
Sure.
And so Terraform has this concept where it shows a diff of what it's doing. And so let's say a human is using CAP, right? This is not the automated workflow that's going on. They're just setting up their workflow. What CAP does is it shows like a really nice diff of what exactly the changes are that are being committed to the cluster. The user just then decides whether or not to go ahead with those changes. So that really brings in the reliability part of things. And so what's interesting is since CAP is sort of seeing what's changing on the cluster, now whenever CAP, so let's say every 5 minutes or 30 seconds, it's completely up to the author of that particular workflow. CAP is trying to deploy resources onto the cluster. It does nothing if the cluster state is exactly how it should be. So that way, CAP really fits into like CIs as well. So you do it once, you've set it up manually, and it just like fits in everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to early in my career when deploys were, I mean, Rube Goldberg machine is the best way to describe it. You right click in your ID, you build some artifact that you drag over to some magic file location, and some cron job picks it up periodically, and it's all based on hard coded credentials sitting in a clear text file that we just pretend isn't there. And again, it just amazes me that it ever worked, and that it was even remotely reliable, especially with the sheer number of variables in play. And I mean, it obviously led to lots of issues of, well, it worked here, but not there. Well, why? Well, because, we had this one little thing that's slightly different, or the patches were applied in a different order, and that was enough to blow things up. So I'm a big fan of anything that gets us closer to, computer, make it so. And the computer just figures it out for us.
As declarative as it can be.
Right. That's another interesting shift, honestly, in software is towards more of that declarative style and that sort of convention over configuration style. I think that's another interesting shift, that I appreciate as well. Just do this. I don't care how. Just make this happen. And I do think that's another powerful shift for us as an industry.
So like since Kubernetes itself is maybe I could say YAML in, YAML out. It's all YAML, and that's what's
YAML
interesting.
All the way down.
And that's how sort of our tools work as well. Like we sort of believe in working with Kubernetes instead of building a wrapper around it, right?
Sure.
And we just make the whole process easier. So for example, if we talk about our templating tool, right? It's called YTT. And so what's different about YTT and let's say some other templating tools, right? Let's say there's a customize, there's hand template. So YTT sort of looks at your configuration as a data structure instead of looking at it like it's text. So what's the best part about that is if something's coming out of YTT, it has to be valid YAML.
Okay.
It cannot be invalid YAML, right? And so in theory, you could use YTT to configure any platform that uses YAML. So like one tool that does just one thing really well and reliably.
Sure. Well, and I think that's another thing that we've learned as well, that you're better off having simple tools that do one thing and then pipe simple tools together to get more interesting results. I mean, that's been in the Unix community forever, Linux community obviously as well. And I think that's something we're finally starting to embrace on the software engineering side more aggressively. I mean, I feel like microservices are an example of that, frankly, and functions are an example of that, and I think we're finally starting to apply that more widely, which is a win ultimately.
Definitely.
So how do you feel about YAML? YAML's one of those things where some developers have, let's just say, real strong opinions.
Yeah. That's yeah. So I think no YAML is like a popular thingy right now, where I think it's just people are. I think writing YAML is probably the most difficult part of being someone who, let's say, manages a cluster or something like that. I guess that's where things like templating come in, things like anything that helps you deduplicate that comes in.
Right.
But yeah, like I do believe that for someone who isn't used to writing YAML, right? Because I was introduced to the world of Kubernetes almost at the same time when I was introduced to Carvel. And I had a lot of trouble figuring out how the tabs and spaces, where they go, things like that, right? Yeah. So what's interesting is that's something we've been thinking about as well, and it's not just YAML. So we know why these simple composable tools, and the term we use is just as you said, we try and follow the Unix philosophy. And so the thing is, let's say someone's pretty new to Kubernetes, right? And they just want to play around with the tool. They're already figuring out where the tab should go. So it becomes pretty difficult to maybe, pick up 4 or 5 tools. And we sort of started like a project called KCTRL, which moves towards generating some boilerplate for the users. So it asks a few basic questions as to, are you building a layer over something that's been already released? Do you already have all of your config on your local directory? It'll ask a few questions like that and generate some boilerplate, which is once again, so the end product of the process of initializing a package is a YAML, again, which is not written by the user, though, which tells the new tool, KCTR, K-control, as we decided to call it later on. I'm sorry, I was calling it KCTR throughout, so still getting there. So what K-control, so this resources that have been created tell K-control how to build a package. And they can be something like, I want to build images using BuildKit or Docker, and then so there's this tool called kbuild, which ensures that all images are referenced by their hash values instead of version tags, because so that if you're packaging things, they should be like immutable, right? Like no one is gonna be able to change the hash, but someone might just push another tag with the same image. And yeah, so there's this whole line of things that happens one after the other, the workflow. And so we're already declaratively defining the workflow for deploying resources.
Sure.
We're sort of trying to declaratively define how the resources are put together and built as well. And the benefit of that is, firstly, new users, they can sort of get up and running faster, get some boilerplate in, and then play around with the resources. And for more advanced users, I would say they can actually tweak around that declarative model that we have to what they want to do. They can be more hands-on with YAML, whereas users who don't want to touch YAML right now, they can take the time to get familiarized with it. Right?
Well, and to be fair, all configuration has its pain points. I'm old enough to remember when we did a lot of stuff in XML. And I always felt like that had more to do with the fact that we had a real easy access to an XML parser. And so that just became like the default. Yeah, let's write this tool in XML because, we can just leverage this off the shelf thing. Not that XML is such a beautiful language to write configuration in. And so I think when people bash on JSON or on YAML or on any of the other configurations, I just think, well, is XML better? Did you want to have a lot of brackets in there that you had to deal with? And talk about making mistakes. There's lots of ways to make mistakes. I mean, I've messed up JSON more ways than I can count, and I always miss a comma somewhere, or I add a comma I don't need. Those are my two most common mistakes, and I'm sure I'm not alone there. So I feel like that's just the challenge of trying to write configuration. I mean, do people have a better option, a better approach? I don't know. I'm curious what people think would be better.
And I think, so as far as XML is concerned, I've seen bits of it here and there, and I just think folks really loved HTML back then, and they were just like, hey, you know what? We can just do something similar to pass our data around.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So honestly, like, I think I've only seen JSON and YAML, and yeah.
Well, count yourself lucky, because I assure you, having spent a lot of years writing XML configuration-y things, that was no fun at all either. So again, I ask people, what's an improvement? What's better? And I think no matter what we were using, we'd find something we didn't like about it. You know, maybe it's significant white space. Maybe we should just never have significant white space. I don't know. Maybe that's just too convenient for us to use, but to each their own. So do you have any thoughts, advice, comments on how one would get involved with helping out on projects like this? Oh, here we go. Fuel Snable in the house. This is scary. The only tech I like is tech I don't use in prod. Interesting comment, Fuel. I see where you're coming from there. I mean, I get that. As soon as it goes into production, then bad things happen, right? I mean, it's because then I got to support it and I got to maintain it. It's so much easier when I'm just doing a proof of concept. So I don't think you're wrong there, to be honest with you. So maybe that's it. We just shouldn't go to production. Problem solved. Anyway, let me loop back to that question there. How does somebody get involved in any of these things? Any of these open source things that we've got going on? What draws someone in? How do you get started as a person who's new to it?
Right. So I'll actually give some context on why I liked open source before I started working with Carvel, right? So I wrote a lot of TypeScript at some point, and I remember when TypeScript is basically more typed JavaScript, and so I remember when it was like sort of up and coming. Like I don't know if it was up and coming, but I made the switch from JavaScript to TypeScript around, I think, 3 years ago, I would say, and we are sort of like blown away by it. And there was this whole thing where there were like open source contributors documenting and like wrapping existing JavaScript libraries and make them usable and typed, right? So that TypeScript could pick it up. And it absolutely blew my mind that why are people doing this for free, right? It's benefiting everyone. But so yeah, I always had this like sort of desire to give back. And I was lucky enough to sort of, I remember I talked about it with a few people when I was interning at my organization at VMware. And yeah, I don't know how things fell into place, but I actually got into a role where I was allowed to contribute as my full-time job. And I really appreciate that. But yeah, I think the most, so I have been also working towards contributing to other projects and maybe being more active in other communities, right? And I think the biggest misconception is that you have to start off with something significant, or you cannot help out in your own way, because there's a lot of work that goes on. Like I've realized this after like interacting with folks who are very active in various communities, right? Like there are people who are doing more outreach, like maybe dev relations, and yeah, like people like it's what's amazing is like people have really different journeys of how they start contributing. I think there's something for everyone out there. Like you just need to I think the biggest part of open source is just showing up,
right?
You know, and showing up with good intent and trying to it's more about what you can do for the project. I think I'm quoting someone, but yeah. So you focus on how you can help the project out, and you just meet these amazing people. You learn a lot from each other, and yeah, that's how it goes. I would say start small and just start showing up.
Well, Soumik, I think you make a really good point, which is a lot of folks seem to think that the only valuable contribution is a massive contribution. Like, oh, look, I wrote this huge component, or I fixed this massive bug, and well, I don't know enough to be able to do any of that. And I've said this at least a few times on this show, but if you see a problem in the docs, fix it. Even if it's simple as a typo, or if something's just not clear, or something's missing, or hey, this is out of date now because there's a new version of it. Great. Open it up, send in a PR. That I think is some of the most valuable contributions people can make. It's also one of the hardest ones for people who are knee deep in it to see or remember or spot. So please, don't feel like it has to be something that's going to be held up on a pedestal. It can be something that you think is really small and minor that could be really useful and powerful. So take the time to put in that request and see what happens. And it's a great way to get started. I mean, it's a great way to get your foot in the door and build up that confidence to doing the larger kinds of things. But nobody starts with, and then I wrote the component that does X. Like that's not how it works. We build up to that in all things. But so Fuel agrees with that. On typo PR will be merged ASAP. 1000% agreed. And let's see, what else do we say here? If you make a huge PR, it might be controversial. Yeah, that's a great point. That sometimes people get too out over their skis, and it might actually be something that the committers can't take on at that moment. And so, hey, appreciate your work, but there's nothing we can do with it right now.
Right.
And then this is a bigger question than I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this, but how should a company sponsor employees to contribute? That's a great question, Fuel.
Yeah, I think
I wish more companies would do it. I'm not gonna lie, and go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can. I think that's a lot of stuff that happens on the management side, which I do not have perspective into.
Right, me either.
So yeah, I've always been the tech guy, so
right.
I'm not exactly sure, but it's something we really prioritize. Obviously, Carvel does have very extensive use cases within VMware. But as an open source project, I think it's important that companies identify that if there's like sort of widespread adoption of something that you're using internally, it's just that much more reliable, right?
Right.
People will run into problems more often. And you have people who will fix them, and maybe they'll start fixing it themselves. And I think that's why companies should. I'm sure there are a lot of folks who could talk at length about this, but I think that's why companies should definitely back open source.
Right. Well, and I think there's a couple things here that I would say, Fuel. I mean, one, a lot of companies benefit from open source, and it seems like more companies should put in some effort to help support the things that they're benefiting from. And I think where some organizations get in trouble is they maybe see a roadblock is, well, we can't have a team of 45 people working on this full time. It doesn't have to be full time. It doesn't have to be 45 employees. It can start with one or two people doing a few hours a week of contributions. And it could be small contributions. It doesn't always, again, have to be these massive kinds of things.
Right.
Now, I know some organizations, and I've never quite figured this out, have like a mantra from the lawyers, thou shalt not do this because reasons, and they all fall back on some legal interpretation of an open source license. I am not a lawyer. I don't pretend to understand that particular version of language compiler. But that's another one of those things where I think companies have to have a conversation about what are the consequences really here. And, I know there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around certain licenses, and I understand that. But are there instances of organizations that truly have had their, corporate whatever taken because somebody contributed? I don't remember seeing. Pretty sure that would have shown up on the Twitter. But to your point, you and I are techies. We're not on the management side.
Yeah. Like the most I know about like legal stuff is I need to sign a CLA, run it through my organization, and luckily enough, they're gonna approve it. They mostly do that, so I'm lucky that way.
Right.
Because it has happened a few times that someone who's been using our project does contribute, but
sure,
the company is not ready to process a CLA because they've never done that before, right?
Right.
So the CLA gets rejected, and the person's like, "Can I use my personal email?" And we're like, "You just commented that you're a part of an organization. I don't think we can do that." So
Yeah, there's a lot of that that's unfortunately above our pay grade, as they say, and
Right.
I don't think we have maybe some practical ideas, but that doesn't mean the lawyers and the C-level suite type folks are gonna buy into that necessarily. But
Mhm.
I think things are getting better. Maybe that's just me being optimistic,
Mhm.
but it feels like things were a lot worse in that term. Certainly in the beginning of open source, it feels like that's improved somewhat,
Right.
but maybe not. So
I
you
would.
mentioned. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Soumik.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I would say it definitely has like at least my team, you're actually encouraged to spend some time, sort of getting a vibe check on the community, if you will,
Sure.
and even contributing if there's some area that you're interested in and some specific, let's say, I don't know, a SIG maybe, or another project that's built on top of Kubernetes, we're actually pretty much encouraged to be a part of that community. And that doesn't have to be like in form of code contributions. Maybe you just want to try out their tools and help them iterate over things, right? I think that sort of matters too.
Yeah. Well, Fuel has another great point, which is that some licenses do have patent clauses that might not mesh well with other corporate
Hmm. Right.
artifacts. And absolutely, again, I think this is where the lawyers definitely need to have their say. I just feel like they tend to overreact in the negative, which is, well, we can't get in any trouble if we don't do anything. Ergo, let's not do anything. Instead of, yes, it's reasonable to do X, Y, and Z. And given some of the companies that back open source, like us, like Microsoft, like Google, like Meta, it's clearly doable. So I'm
Yeah.
very curious what is the holdup legally, at least at some of these other organizations. But oh, I've got a Thindle showing. Good afternoon, good evening, Thindle, I should say. I think I've got my European contingent here because this is a much more convenient time for my European friends for sure. And then yes, it's not illegal if you don't get caught. Yeah, that's there's some truth. I mean, this is where we get into that whole. Is it better to beg forgiveness than get permission? Maybe
Mhm.
I don't know. That's an open question. I will not pressure anyone to go either the
Yeah.
right way on that. Maybe. All right. So Fuel says Ericsson was very good at protecting IP and still allowing contributions. Again, some organizations are more mature or more open to this than others, maybe, and you're encouraged to contribute. But yeah, well, and that's fair. I can understand the lawyers saying we cannot contribute to projects that use these sets of licenses, or
Mhm.
having to sort of approve the individual project before that happens. But at least again, my limited experience in the enterprise IT world is it was like a blanket no without even asking what are you contributing and to what and how extensively do we use it and is it really in our best interest. I think about some of these companies that complain when some pet feature of theirs isn't implemented quickly enough or some bug hasn't been fixed quickly enough. Well, it's open source,
Right.
so send us a PR then if this is that big of a deal to you. But that's just me.
Mhm.
Oh, this is interesting. So then he goes on to say that some key projects you get paid to contribute to. Yeah, I wish there was more of that. I'm not going to lie. I think that would be healthy for the whole industry. But that's just me. So fascinating, fascinating. Anything else that I miss here? Oh, there was one other thing that I wanted to touch on that Fuel mentioned. This whole notion of how the wheel kind of keeps turning. That JavaScript is borrowing ideas now from TypeScript and we've seen that in lots of aspects of technology.
Mhm.
Java borrowed from previous languages and then C# came along and then Java's like, oh, hey, those are some good ideas. And there's that constant
Mhm.
borrowing. And how have you seen that in your experience? How have you seen that with the stuff you've worked on where, we borrow
Or
from
patterns,
other
right?
places?
Um, so yeah, as we talked about before, we try to keep our tools Unix-like, right? It's
Sure.
it's pretty tried and proven. So that's one thing I can think of. And uh, so yeah, I can't really think of anything else that's specific.
Okay. All right. So Field
Yeah.
goes on to say the biggest headache they had was contributing to F Sharp, which had a CLA, contributor license agreement, and then a very fine certificate of no ownership from them. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's always fun. Here's the thing. Here, see, it's all good. It's all good. So
Oh,
oh,
so
good times.
that actually reminds me of something cool, though. I think a good way of going about that is having a neutral organization, maybe CNCF host your project, and we're actually moving towards the CNCF donation, so
Sure.
that we have more folks who are comfortable contributing to, and they don't think that this is something that's just VMware.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I can see where some organizations would have some resistance if they feel like it's
Hmm.
essentially a corporate owned open source, which
Right.
is a bit of a oxymoron, but I understand where they're coming from that perspective. So, all right, did I miss anything else? No, it looks good there. So we obviously mentioned this a little bit. You are not in the same time zone I am. So tell us a little bit about where you're coming to us from, and how where do you live? What do you do? What are
Oh,
your
right.
hobbies? Let's veer off
So,
the software path for a bit here.
right. I'm right now in Bangalore, even though I was born and brought up in Mumbai. So what's cool about that is Mumbai and Bangalore had the same time zones, and I've realized that's not something a lot of folks can relate to. And yeah,
Certainly not in the U.S.
yeah, I'm not in the US, and there's obviously daylight savings, and so how I experience daylight savings is all of a sudden I just wake up one day and all of my meetings are either a bit later or a bit earlier, and I'm like,
Right, right.
that's all right, I guess.
Do you have any tips or tricks or techniques that you've used to deal with the time zones? Because we were talking about this in the pre-show. This is a
Right.
universal thing for me. Two of my colleagues that I've been doing a lot of work with are in Europe, and so we always have to kind of figure out
Mhm.
what works. And it is always interesting, especially if I have a European guest or if I've got such as yourself, even more pushed on the time zone. Different allowances have to be made in order for it to be reasonable. Do you have any sort of
Right.
experience now having worked across time zones to smooth that out? Or
I think one thing great is to have as many asynchronous conversations as you can, right? Like be explicit about everything on Slack.
sure,
Maybe someone who's working from another time zone doesn't have to hit you up and wait for you to respond, right? About anything that you must have sort of vaguely mentioned before. So yeah, that's something I think really helps out. But as far as time management is concerned, I've always been quite the night owl. So
okay,
I sort of I start my day a little bit late, and I'm just active in the evening. That's all. I don't have to actively be at my desk. But
sure,
a lot of slacking I do is from my phone.
yeah,
I've written YAML on my phone. It's a bit wild, but I've done that. It's just
right.
yeah, whatever
That
works.
that has to help. Being able to do this from your phone or being able to do this from you don't have to be
Right,
rooted to a desk anymore. That's got to be an improvement from 15 years ago for sure.
definitely.
You
And
know, and
yeah,
I think that the challenge for all of us is just that awareness that there are multiple time zones and that this meeting that might be convenient for you might be very challenging for someone else. And then it's also that
mhm.
recognition that we have to kind of spread the pain around a little bit. I've seen too many cases where they just sort of lean on one time zone and like, yeah, you're going to get the crappy time all the time. Like it can't be that way. There has to be some shared pain.
Mhm. That is something I'm fortunate to have actually never run into. And the one, as I talked about in the pre-show, right? The one person we do talk to on a regular basis is our tech lead, and he's a morning person, so
Sure.
it really helps us out. Like we actually end our day way before 5:30. On most days, like maybe we have late meetings once or twice a
Sure.
week, and we sort of play around with it to see what works for everyone, have enough time before the meeting so that people know about it. There are no last minute meetings that pop up in the evening.
Right. Right. Yeah, I
Plus,
think that's a good point is you have to experiment and try things out and be willing sometimes to work outside your normal working hours, whatever those happen to be. I have noticed in our industry we seem to have an overabundance of night owls when you compare that to like the normal people, I guess. I'm always curious if we get into this industry because people are night owls, or being in this industry like allows or encourages that. I mean, I don't know. Would you have any thoughts on that from your perspective?
For me, I think it's the other way around. Like I
Okay.
definitely always was a night owl. Like
Okay.
I don't know where that's gone wrong. Like I could finish a book overnight. Like I've done that when I was maybe
Sure.
like in ninth grade or something. But yeah, I guess yeah. So I'm pretty comfortable staying up, and like I'm glad my team's supportive in the sense that let's say I actually like up late working for some reason, and as rare as it is, like it's completely normal for me to just start my day later, right?
Sure.
And like yeah, so yeah, but yeah, I don't think I actually know a decent number of people who are like morning people
Sure.
in tech, but I agree with you. We definitely lean towards the other side, if you might.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I have a few friends who I have sent them an email relatively late my time, and it's really late their time or really early their time, I guess, just depending on your point of view. And I get responses, and I'm like, what's going on here? Why are you shouldn't be awake yet, or you shouldn't already be asleep. And like, oh no, I usually don't go to bed till like 2 a.m. Oh, okay. All right. So, but hey, to each their own. It's one of the nice things about this industry. Often we can, control our schedule a little more than others can, for sure. But let's see. Fuel had another comment about CLAs that allowed Microsoft control over contributions, and that required sign off on forms that caused lots of headaches. Oh yeah, anytime you're signing forms on behalf of the organization, and yeah, it's a good time. Anytime the lawyers get involved, you've just added some time and pain and extra scrutiny to whatever it is you're doing. Good times. So when you're not doing YAML on your phone, what do you do for fun? What are your hobbies? What else do you do away from the technology side of the world?
Bunch of things. So I'm really into weird music.
Okay.
Yeah, my childhood was a lot of Green Day, and from there I evolved into this metal person who
Okay.
just listened to metal and hated everything else. Then one day I think I was listening to something that I would probably be like, hey, no, that's not metal. I would listen to that, but I really liked it, and I don't know, it sort of grew over the ages, but I just
Sure.
like collecting different kinds of music. And so what makes me feel really good is, let's say someone's listening to something and I'm like, oh, you like that? You know what? Give this a shot. And if they really enjoy that, I'm like, that's a good feeling.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. I realized within the last few years that I've reached that point in my life where I'm introduced to new music from my son, because he's a teenager. And so obviously when he was younger, it was my wife and I introducing him to music. And now it's him saying, hey, Dad, you should listen to this, or, oh, you should play this next, or, oh, this is really cool. And, that's been interesting. Now, I mean, he's gotten some influences from us, obviously, but he has definitely delved into some things that I still don't know how he found them. He's big into like EDM and things like that. And so he finds that fascinating. And I don't quite understand some of it, although I do like a lot of what he shared with me. But that is an interesting sort of thing that happens as you get older, when you start hearing about things from not from your circle, but from your kid or your kid's friends and things like that.
So that reminds me of something. So my dad, he had a bunch of ABBA cassettes. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah,
Is it ABBA?
yeah.
Right.
I
So
think
yeah, I was
ABBA.
pretty
ABBA. I think it's ABBA. I'm going with ABBA.
okay. So yeah, so I was like familiar with those songs, and
Okay.
this one day, I don't know, I was doing the usual millennial thing. I was like scrolling through some micro content, and this one song felt so familiar. So I did the reverse
Yeah.
search thing. Turns out
Yeah.
it's an ABBA song, and yeah, so it's a lot of young folks do get into like older music that way. I think that's pretty cool. For example, so Stranger Things 4 recently had like a Kate Bush song in it, Running Up the Hill, and it's just like shot to the top of the charts again. And everyone's like, oh my God, this is so good. You never knew this existed. So yeah,
Like,
I think
it's like 10 years old. Come on, it's not. Wait, it is funny how I see this a lot with developers when it comes to programming languages. Whatever the first programming language you learned is like the beginning of time, and like nothing predated that. But I think that's not the only example of that. You see that with music or fashion or lots of things where people are like,
Right.
oh, no one's ever done this before. Yeah, no, we did. Yeah, this was 20 years ago. This was in style. My son, I don't even remember how this came up, but he was asking what music I listened to when I was his age. And so I had to kind of think about it a little bit. And I did some Google searches, just kind of refresh myself on, hey, what was the music at that time period? And I ended up playing a fair amount of it for him. And what occurred to me is he's at that age where, like, when I was doing a high school dance or whatever, we'd have like 80s music, and it was like 80s day would be like a dress up thing. And now, like, this generation's doing that with the 90s or with the aughts, and you start to go, wait a minute, that wasn't long ago, was it? I mean, I guess it is, but it's fascinating to see how that stuff sort of kind of turns over. But Fuel says they listen to Beethoven. Yeah. I don't think you're that old, Fuel, but I mean, I'll allow it. I'll allow it. But the kids these days, get off my lawn, right, Fuel? But anyway, no, that's fascinating. All right.
And what's really cool is a lot of new artists sample old music. Like,
oh, sure,
it's very common. And when you randomly look up a song, like maybe trying to look at why it was written or something like that,
yeah,
you just end up with this really nice song which is really old, and you're like, oh my god, that's good as well. Right? That happens so much. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
I don't think we always appreciate all the connections between some of these musicians. We were at a concert, I think it was either the day that Prince died or the day after Prince died. It was right around when Prince died. And so in between sets, they were playing all Prince music or songs Prince wrote. And it was stunning to me how many songs you're like, oh my God, I didn't know he wrote that. Like, that was a really popular song from some completely different artist. And yeah, no, that was one he wrote. And I ran into a similar thing recently where I'm blanking on exactly who it was, wrote a bunch of like jingles and a bunch of other songs for other artists. And you start to go, wow, I had no idea. I mean, this was already a very famous musician in their own right. And then they did all this other stuff too. And it's like, huh. All right, what else do we want to talk about? So I'm always curious, coming out of, or I don't know, maybe we're still in the middle of, I'm not sure how to feel about COVID these days. Is there anything you picked up like habit-wise or sort of forced through the quarantine stuff we dealt with that you're like, that was like a positive life change, I'm carrying that forward, I want to keep doing that? Is anything you pulled out of that over the last couple of years?
Like, so I'm pretty sure hybrid work was always a thing in my organization, but I love it.
Yeah.
I love working from the office, but some days I just want to stay in, right?
Totally.
And that is definitely something I love. And another shocking fact along the same lines, I've never, let's say, given an interview in person, or I've never. It's pretty intimidating, to be honest, to think about that. Maybe at some point I'll have to do that, So yeah. That's pretty interesting.
That's a good point. I have I'm an adjunct at the University of Minnesota, and tomorrow I have to go down and like re-verify my I-9 or whatever form I need to do. And I keep thinking to myself, like, can't we do this? Can we do this online? Like when I joined Pivotal, that was all remote, and I never had to go into an office on day one and show any paperwork. And of course, the other thing I think is funny is I've only been doing this for like 15 years. So you think, do I really need to like reprove that I'm still who I said I was? But apparently. So yeah, I do think that's going to be. Oh, so Field says Prince was pretty good. All right. I mean, I'm going to assume you're being slightly sarcastic there, Fuel, but that's fine. The MSP airport has an actual Prince store in it. So we kind of like Prince here, just to be clear. But so what's your sense of what normal is going to look like work-wise moving forward? I mean, I think work from home is here to stay, certainly in our industry and several others where it was long considered a can't do it. What do you want to do moving forward? What do you think your ideal state is?
So when I'm going to the office, right, for me it's more of a change of pace.
Sure.
Right? Change of environment, stuff like that. And Yeah, I don't really know, but I do want to sort of start getting used to meeting and talking to people in person,
Sure.
because I have not done a lot of that in like professional environments, and I
Right.
often try to sort of, I don't know, hit up someone I've talked on Slack and just meet up with them and be like, oh hey. So what's really, so something amazing is I always try to guess the person's height,
Oh, sure.
because you absolutely cannot know.
No idea.
You
Nope.
absolutely cannot know.
Nope. No idea.
That's a fun thing to do.
Well, I think it's fascinating just to realize that people do have legs again, because we've spent 2.5 years just staring at people from like
Yeah.
mid torso up. And
Hmm.
we finally got my entire team together back in the end of June. And it was the first time I'd actually met a few of my colleagues in person. I've been on countless
Hmm.
Zoom calls with them, but that was the first time I got to see them in person. And my team, we were in that rhythm of pretty much anytime you're on the road, you were going to be with one or two or three teammates. And so having that taken away was really hard for me personally, because that's where a lot of my socializing comes from, right?
Right.
It's hanging out with my friends in various cities. But it was really reassuring just to hang out again. And it was a lot more emotional than I frankly expected it to be, to finally be with my team. And I do think that personal contact is important and necessary. I just don't think it needs to be Monday through Friday, 50 weeks a year. I think it can be
Right.
spread out a little more than that, and
Hmm.
in different doses. But we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. Uh, I'm still honestly figuring out how working adults make friends. So yeah, I'll let you know if I make.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
let you know if I make
it's
any
challenging.
progress in that area. Yeah.
It's harder for sure. And I think part of what makes it hard is when you're in school, you're surrounded by people your age that are in the same context you are.
Right.
And then you get into the adult world and you're around people who can vary from you by 30, 40 years. They're in a completely different place in life. You've got everybody who, from I'm a single, I'm not married, to, oh, I've got grandkids. And there are very distinct differences in the demands on your time. My son just started, first day of sophomore year is today. And so his schedule dominates my life and my wife's life, because he can't drive yet, although he does have his permit, which gives me some pause, but it's
Hmm.
fine. It's a natural thing. But he's very active in things. He's playing soccer on the high school team, and he's got a game tonight. He's got a game on Wednesday. He's got games next week, and his season is very compact but very busy.
Hmm.
And so Saturday he had a game, Thursday he had a game, and so all these things, like, yeah, I'd love to go play. Oh yeah, no, I can't play golf. My son's got soccer, and then I got to take him to practice, and then I got to pick him up here, and
Right.
then we got to do this. That makes it harder because you're not all on the same schedule, and you're
Hmm.
not all in the same place, and it definitely throws a bit of a wrench into it. But it's still possible. I mean,
Hmm.
Bob Brindley is one of my all-time best friends, and I met him as an adult working on the same team. So there you go. It's possible.
Yeah. So since you talked about how like you meet a lot of different people in the workplace, so one thing I think I've really been fortunate about is uh, I've never felt like I have to be like, let's say, go out of my way to be formal or something like
Sure.
that. I'm not sure if that's because a lot of these teams I talk to are folks who are like open sourcey, but yeah, that's something I really appreciate. Like I always sign my emails with the cheers and rocket emojis, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty cool that I can do that. And yeah,
Right. Right.
so I really like that.
Open sourcey. Nice. Nancijo, open sourcey. Love it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Is there anything that you've been reading or streaming that you've really
Yeah.
enjoyed, or that is kind of helped you through this
Oh,
this whole
so I
experience?
absolutely love fantasy novels. Like that was
Oh, Nancy
decent
Joe.
part of.
Sorry. See, this is always the fun of trying to understand people's handles. So I was going to try to make that into a very different thing. So Nancy Joe. Got it, Nancy. I'm on it. I'll learn. Sorry. Sorry about that, Summit.
The worries. Yeah, I absolutely love fantasy novels.
Okay.
So yeah, so somehow the first like fantasy series I ever read is the only book series that I've read multiple times. It's
Okay. Which
called
one?
The Inheritance Cycle, and it's by Christopher Paoloni. I
Oh,
think the
wow.
first book is pretty popular. It's Aragon.
Okay.
Dragon is pretty popular, but yeah, because that was turned into a movie, which was not great. The book is better, but so I that's the only. So I like books with sort of build worlds which are like different,
Sure.
because I mean we live with this one, so might
Right.
as well,
Right.
might
Okay.
as well do something different.
Have you read the Expanse series?
Expanse. I don't think so.
Okay, so that's I like to call that Game of Thrones in outer space, although some people would
That's interesting.
contest that as a description. It is a sprawling universe, just like Game of Thrones, with a lot of characters and a lot of arcs. It is somewhat less violent and a lot less incest. In fact, I think there's zero, if memory serves. So, it is a different take. But the authors, it's two authors writing under one pseudonym, and one of them I think is George R. Martin's assistant or
Yeah,
something like that. So he's had a lot of influence on the series for sure. It was made into a TV show too. That's on Amazon.
I'm just hoping George R. R. Martin finishes the last book, because I've been waiting for it for too long.
You
Yeah.
and thousands of other people. So, Fuel says you read a great fantasy book called Clean Code. Boom, boom. I gotta have like a rim shot, sound effect or something on the board. That would be good. I'm with you there. And Fuel says can't handle Game of Thrones because of violence. It is incredibly violent. My son was asking me the other day, when can I watch that one? I'm like, not quite yet, buddy. That one's, you can read the books. That's probably fine, but you can't watch the series quite. Although he did see the trailer for the prequel, and he's like, that looks amazing. I want to watch that. Can I watch it? Like, maybe mom and I should watch it first and just see how much they borrowed from the Game of Thrones playbook before we unleash that on the teenager. But yeah, I agree with you. The first three books I thought were amazing. The last two were kind of and it's like, please write the rest. I want to see how he's going to wrap it up. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that's not going to happen. I have at least one friend now who has declared he will not start a series until it's completed. He's tired of being in the middle of one of these and then the author dies.
That's a great way to go.
Yeah, just wait until it's done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree, Fuel. I think the first book and the first season were fantastic. It definitely, I understand. I see now. I would say that up to the last season, Game of Thrones was pretty outstanding television. The last season they kind of threw out the playbook a little bit. I understand why. I mean, they had to wrap it up. HBO was tired of spending $15 million an episode or whatever it was, and yeah, that's for sure.
What's interesting is the books were getting more magic-y. So
right.
Yeah, I was wondering where it's going, but guess I'll never find out. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little strange when they've ended the series the way they have, and yet, and clearly that was in line with where Martin's going. I mean, they wouldn't have allowed them to tell a completely different story. But by the same token, I don't think that's necessarily how he was going to wrap it up. But who knows?
Right.
Who knows? So, so Fuel had a friend who was hurt by Wheel of Time. Yeah, totally. That was actually one I was thinking of, to be honest with you. And so Nancy's got a great point here. $1 billion. I heard it was a rumor of that much. I knew it was supposed to be like the most expensive show ever. I guess I didn't realize it was approaching that kind of money. And I think the other interesting aspect of this is how, for the first however many years of television, shows all fit in the same kind of formula. It was 22 minutes long or 44 minutes long, and for most of television, they were all encapsulated inside that. There was nothing that carried over other than the characters were the same, but storylines rarely carried over from episode to episode. And then the long arc dramas started to appear, and they broke that mold where, a throwaway line in season 2 becomes a plot point in season 4. And you have to remember that, these two had a beef back in the first season. But I think the other interesting thing now is to see them break out of, it could be 47 minutes. It could be an hour and 10 minutes. It could be 90 minutes. I mean, I think that's where the Amazon stuff's going to do with Lord of the Rings is, I heard the first 3 episodes are like 90 minutes long or some crazy thing, but
I actually prefer that over having 22-minute episodes, because they're just very easy to not stop watching.
Well, there's some
So
truth
yeah,
to that. It is pretty
yeah.
darn easy to sit down and look up and go, oh, we've been sitting on the couch for a little too long. We should go to bed.
Mhm.
So yeah. So what did
So
oh yeah,
I'm
easy to
pretty,
digest. Exactly.
yeah, pretty hyped about Lord of the Rings though, because
Yeah.
Tolkien sort of like wrote the template for, like, every fantasy novel series ever to come. Like the
Right.
races, different languages. For some reason, dwarves always end up doing metal work. It's just he's the one who started that. And I think C.S. Lewis was before that, or they were
Sure.
like friends or something. And that's one series that's pretty different. That orcs and metal head dwarves, like it's just pretty different, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Can you even imagine being around when he was basically workshopping that,
Oh,
and
so
doing readings for
it's
people, and I mean that would have been amazing. I think just to see. And do you think anybody at the time had any sense of, wow, we're seeing something that's going to have
yeah,
this is a cultural touch point.
right.
I'm just curious to know if people could tell that when he was
Which
workshopping this.
what's even more interesting, it actually started off as stories he used to tell his children, like random tall tales with just hobbits, and then he started like
Sure.
adding more races to spice it up. And
Hmm.
then I'm not sure about this. I think it was C.S. Lewis who was like, "Hey, dude, like you can sell this, man. let's
Dude,
go
you
for
got
it."
something commercial here. You should start writing it down. Write it down. See what
Yeah.
happens. See what happens. Well, that's interesting. So Fuel says, don't really watch stuff anymore. I just browse. See, the other piece of this that I think is an interesting challenge is we're faced with a paradox of choice because there's so many things you could read or
Yeah.
watch or listen to or
That's
consume
true.
all this content. I mean, in the hour as you and I've been hanging out, I guarantee, days worth of content has been
Hmm.
produced. So
Right.
it is overwhelming. And I just read something that basically said, yeah, there's no such thing as can't miss TV anymore, and that's okay. And you have to be
Yeah.
okay being on the outside and not knowing about the whatever hit show is. And I think the sort of non-linearity that we have today, where you don't have to watch a day of anymore. We were at an event. Must have been a soccer game, and my in-laws asked us if we had started watching the Game of Thrones prequel, and my wife's like, "No, we don't ever watch anything when it comes out. We wait and binge." And
Hmm.
but I'm old enough to remember when, nope, there's a schedule. And it's
Yeah.
Sunday at 8. You sit down and you turn on HBO and you watch this, or Wednesdays at 9. You turn on NBC and you watch this, and like those days are over for 99% of us. All right, well, let me do a few lightning round here, and then I will let you get back to your evening, and we'll declare victory. So I'm a big coffee fan. I drink a lot of espresso, so I always love asking this one: coffee, espresso, or tea? What is your caffeine of choice?
Coffee, iced Americano, preferably.
Ah, okay, good choice.
Yeah.
Good choice. Pie or cake when you want something sweet?
Uh, that's a toughie. I'm more like a custard kind of person. Like
Oh,
tiramisu
oh,
is my favorite. That's also, you know.
okay. So how do you feel
Also,
about
love Indian
korma?
sweets, but this is too
Okay.
much to pick one. There's too much to pick one.
Vindel says pie. There's a vote for pie from our peanut gallery. So I appreciate that, Vindel. Is there can cake has too much? Wait a minute, too much cream, and you're into pie. Is that bad? I don't understand the problem here. That's like saying there's too much frosting on this cake. I don't get it. So the Minnesota State Fair is going on right now, and it is one of the
Hmm.
most subscribed state fairs. Hundreds of thousands of people go over the course of the run. It'll be in the millions, and a typical day will be over 100,000. On the really busy days, it'll be well over 200,000 people, and it's
Hmm.
basically an excuse to go and buy overpriced food that's really not good for you. Almost everything is deep fried on a stick. Not everything, but many things are, and it's a real cultural touch point. At least in Minnesota, most
Hmm.
people in Minnesota will go to the fair at some point. Although, interestingly enough, some people fall into the category of never go, hate the fair. That's a minority. Then there's people who, oh yeah, I go like every day, which seems a little much. And then there's more people in the middle where, yeah, I go once or twice, and that seems to be enough. But also, Thindle says blueberry pie with vanilla sauce. All right, I can get behind that. And then Fuel meat pie. No, that's not a dessert, is it? You wouldn't have a meat pie for dessert,
I
would you,
hope
Fuel?
not.
God.
I can imagine a sweet meat pie.
No, that just sounds wrong. I mean, even the name meat pie just seems wrong to me. But I'm sure Layla will convince me otherwise. All right, so I have neither of these living in the middle of Minnesota, but oceans or mountains, which do you prefer?
So the thing is, I've always been at a place where like the ocean's just a drive away, right? And when I say a drive away, I mean like let's say 10 kilometers at max.
Sure,
That's 5 miles, I guess.
sure,
And so I'm like I took seas for granted all my life, but now I'm in like a more landlocked place. So I'll
sure.
hate it. But yeah, so my idea of vacations used to always be someplace more hilly. But
Okay.
now that I'm like close to the hilly parts and far away from the sea, I sort of miss the sea.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so Fuel says that he was at a great fair in Minneapolis. Fuel, I can almost guarantee that was the Minnesota State Fair. If it was large, and if it was in August or September, then I can guarantee it was the Minnesota State Fair. And it's actually technically, I think, in St. Paul, Falcon Heights. It might be the exact thing, but it is a lot of fun. There's no getting around, at least in my opinion. And so Thindle's telling me that Layla eats pie made out of sheep shepherds. I'll bring that up with her and see if she agrees with that. I'll have to ping her about that. And yes, I'm very, very jealous of my Scandinavian friends who have both the sea and the mountains within easy commuting
And the Northern
distance.
Lights.
Yeah, and the Northern Lights. Yeah, but see, the only problem that would get to me about living even further north than I currently do is again the change in daylights. We talked about that certainly in the
Yeah,
pre-show, that the
yeah.
whole idea of having the sun not coming. I was in Stockholm in May, and I was amazed. I had to leave for my flight at like 3:30 in the morning, and it was already getting light out at 3:30 in the morning in May, and that made me think, oh man, June has got to be crazy. So
Yeah.
let's see what
So I
else.
think I've lived pretty close to the equator, so I really cannot relate to that. Like
It
it's
stays pretty consistent, doesn't it? Yeah, we
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not
it's
the case where I
consistent.
live. The sunrise and sunset changes a lot, and it's always this interesting thing for me because it always feels like we lose daylight faster than we gain it. And obviously we don't, but the days are getting shorter and shorter now. Sunrise is getting, or sunset's getting later and later, or earlier and earlier, excuse me, and sunrise getting later and later. And it's always a weird thing when my phone tells me, oh yeah, sunset tonight's 7:58. And you're like, no, because I know that means that snow is coming. Yeah. So Thindle says sun from like 11 to 15. Yeah. It's an interesting trade-off to say the least. I don't think I would like that. That would be challenging. I know Venkat was teaching somewhere, I want to say Finland, in the middle of winter, and said it was pretty brutal. So, oh yeah. It does go pretty fast, doesn't it, Fuel? To all of a sudden it's really dark all the time. And yeah, but agree with Thindle that lots of sun in the summer is pretty awesome for sure. All right, so I have a sense of where you're going with this one, but I'm going to throw it out there. So, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, which would you align more closely with?
Mm, I would go for Lord of the Rings actually.
All right,
It's
I'll
the
go with that.
OG, right? It's the
Yeah,
OG.
it is. I think that's
Can't
fair.
beat that.
I think that's fair. So yeah. Thindle agrees with you. Lord of the Rings. Oh, and Fuel. All right, we got a lot of votes for Lord of the Rings. All right, good to know. I guess that Amazon series is going to be popular then with our audience. Action, comedy, or drama when you're looking for something to amuse yourself?
It's probably like not the way most people will go to it, but I go for drama actually.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
So yeah, I for sure during the pandemic leaned much more towards comedy, which I feel like is at least part of why Ted Lasso was such an incredible smash hit. I didn't ask you that. Have you watched Ted Lasso? It's always interesting when folks
I
tell
have
me,
not actually. I have
please
not.
do. Please do. I am a
Is
huge
it stand up? Is it stand up?
for me, Ted Lasso is one of the funniest things I've seen maybe ever. It is one of the best casts. It's such an amazing ensemble. They all seem to genuinely like each other,
It's an
and
actual show, like a
it is
TV
a
show.
show. Yes, it is
I see.
based off
Okay.
of a character that NBC created or somebody created to help NBC bring the English Premier League to the US. and
That's
so it
interesting.
really has kind of gone on from there to its own thing. And Sudeikis had a great comment on SNL when he was doing his monologue. He said, "Yeah, it surprised us that it was such a hit too. You know, it combines two things Americans hate: soccer and kindness." And yeah, I agree, Nancy Joe. It's a feel good show with great humor. It's they've done an excellent job of not becoming like saccharine and syrupy, and yet every episode to me you just feel better after watching it, and the comedy is so spot on. I know they are working on season 3. My kid keeps asking me when it's coming out. Last night he's like, "Can we rewatch Ted Lasso again?" And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, we certainly will at some point. You know, we watched season 1 3 times, season 2 twice, and guarantee we'll watch both of them again. But definitely would add that to your list.
Mhm.
So,
I did grow up on Big Bang Theory though, so I can actually
ah,
recite episodes. I can recite
oh wow,
episodes. It
that's
just, so
fantastic.
let's say I cannot pick what I'm going to watch. I just like start a random episode of Big
Makes
Bang Theory.
sense. Makes sense. Makes sense. So Fuel says people just like to escape from the real America. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Believe me, if I wasn't being recorded, I could say different things, but I'll bite my tongue. So, all right. So let's see. Is there any other? Oh yeah, let me ask you this one. How about board games or computer games?
Oh, computer games definitely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Any?
I had 4,000 hours on a competitive game.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's your favorite computer game to play? What do you love sitting down and?
So I really like. Okay, so I think it's been a while since I've played games.
Yeah.
But Skyrim was one of my favorites. You can do absolutely anything, right? You can be a
Yep.
walking cat if you want. It's beautiful. And so the game I spent most of my time with was Dota 2,
Okay.
Defense of the Ancients. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's like it started off as a modification to this popular game during that time called World of was it World of Warcraft? I'm not sure, but it's like this 5v5 for 1 hour in an arena kind of thing,
Okay.
and it's very stressful and it's
Yeah.
very addictive. Does the 4,000 hours? So yeah, that was a while back.
Oh,
That was a
sure,
while back.
sure.
You can see that night owl behavior has just been
Oh, I
consistent
understand
throughout.
that. I understand that for sure.
Yeah.
So Fuel says board games. If you got people, it's hard to play a board game by yourself in most instances. That's for sure.
Uh,
But
oh,
Thindle, I think, is more on your side of it, which is the graphics in my head aren't good enough. Thus I play computer games. So there you go.
so a while back, a couple of us friends actually tried D&D, and that was pretty awesome. Actually, it
Okay.
was fun, and we were pretty unruly, and the DM sort of gave up on us, and he quit. But otherwise, it was fun while it lasted. It was pretty cool.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah,
And so yeah, Fuel
I'm
says,
sorry,
yep, another
I missed
Dota
the
reference. There we
reference.
go. And then hang on, a PL Picker. What?
Uh,
PL Picker.
so my best hero was Crystal Maiden.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I was more of a post 5 to post 4 guy,
Gotcha.
but I love
Gotcha.
Pudge. I'm sure
Sure.
Fuel gets all of this, but yeah.
See, this is one of those things that I find so amazing about video games in particular, that for a relatively modest investment of 20, 30, 40, $50, you can get thousands of hours of entertainment out of that.
Dota 2 is free.
Yeah, I mean, even that, right? I mean, it's amazing to me how, people are like, oh, I can't believe they charge so much for a video game. Well, if you go to the movies and you buy some popcorn and you buy, some snacks, you're going to drop $50 pretty easily, and you're going to
That's
get a
true.
couple hours of entertainment versus, I mean, the amount of time my son has played, instances of FIFA or instances of other games that he's got, boy, we've more than gotten our money's worth out of that for sure. So,
Mhm.
all right. So Fuel says 3,000 hours of Dota and you're still a newbie.
Oh
Wow.
yes,
Okay.
I definitely am. And the worst thing is, so if you don't play this game for like let's say 4 months, you just done. You start all over again
Really?
because they keep pushing patches and everything.
Wow.
It's
That
it's
is a
it's
level of commitment that I definitely do not have the time for, unfortunately. I wish I did. My son keeps saying, you need to do X on FIFA. And I'm like, I'd love to, but I don't have 40 hours a week to devote to that. And I guess we're now turning into what Twitch originally was, which is let's watch people
Mhm.
play video games. I
Yeah.
like to watch Dota because of the insane complexity. Oh, all right. All right.
Yeah.
I get
So
that. Totally
actually,
understand
if
that.
you're like interested in sort of gauging how it looks like, there's this documentary called True Sight. It's really
Okay.
awesome. So it's about the international, which is like the largest Dota tournament, and so yeah, it really helps folks who are not into gaming understand what's going on.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah,
Well,
so
and
it's really
as
cool.
someone who has played plenty of sports and watched more ESPN than is probably healthy, I totally understand why people watch people playing a video game. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not that different from watching somebody play golf or watching somebody play soccer,
correct.
football, baseball, whatever. I mean, it's
Yeah.
same thing, conceptually at least. But anyway. Well, my friend, I appreciate your time. We should probably wrap up here. I always like to put in my plug for Spring One coming up live in December. San Francisco, not a bad place to be in December. Certainly, the weather tends to be a little nicer than it is here in Minnesota. Although we usually don't have snow by then, so it's not too terrible. I guess we'll see. And I'll be back next week. We're off for the Labor Day holiday here in the U.S. But then I've got Justin Riak coming and joining me from the Gradle side of the world. So he and I ran into each other at Kate. I have been running into Justin seemingly everywhere I go for almost the last year. I mean, well, I guess December was my first trip, so 9 months, whatever that's been. And so I'm delighted that I finally convinced him to hang out with me, or he convinced me to hang out with him. I can't remember exactly how it played out, other than Vincent's like, "Hey, you and Justin should do a show together." I'm like, "You're right. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that." So he and I will be chatting about. Well, we'll find out. Florida Man for sure will come up since he is a Florida resident now. So we'll definitely have to pick on him for that. But I want to thank my amazing commenters again: Thindle, Fuel, Snable, Nancy, Joe, etc. Everybody else. Did I miss anybody? Who else talked to me today? I got to scroll all the way back up to the top. And C Sharp Fritz. We'll have to get C Sharp Fritz on the show here at some point. That would be a useful thing as well. So again, my friend, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and hanging out with me. I know it's late, so have a good evening, and I look forward to hopefully guessing your height if we happen to be
Okay,
in the same place.
sure. Sure, go ahead. We shall do that someday.
All right.
And thank you a lot for putting this together. This is the closest I'll probably get to like Saturday Night Live or something. So
Well,
it's really awesome.
I make no bones about it. The reason I started doing this is I missed the hallway chat. I missed bumping into somebody and having this rambling conversation. And so I'm just delighted that I get an excuse to do this on a pretty regular basis and just hang out with people. I mean, that's what I've been doing with Justin seemingly at almost every show I've been to, and we just chat. And so it's the same kind of thing. And so I'm happy I could turn it into a moderately interesting show, I guess. But anyway, all right. Well, thank you, my friend, and you have a good evening. And we'll play our little bumper, and we'll see you on the other side. Cheers.
Cheers. Good